If failure can be a powerful teacher, then why do we wait for it to happen? Why don't we intentionally design for it in a safe way?
Dr. Manu Kapur,
learning scientist who developed the theory of productive failure
to unlock deeper learning through the science of failure.
If you try something and you're able to do it successfully, that's great. But then you're not learning. You're just applying what you know. To learn something new, you need to try something even more difficult, something that you don't know. This is what I call entering the failure zone. Things would be frustrating and you'd struggle a little bit and things will not work out, but this is precisely the zone in which we learn deeply and grow. It's going to be uncomfortable.
How do we start to intentionally design things for failure?
The first thing that we all need to do as adults or any time in life is
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. Jeff Lerner, your host. Always so excited to be back with you, having amazing conversations with amazing human beings. Today, we have yet another one. I'm super excited about this one, Dr. Manu Kapur. He is currently the director of the Singapore ETH Center. If you're not familiar with ETH, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce what the acronym actually means because it's a bunch of, actually, I don't know, is it German or Swiss?
German.
German. It's a bunch of German stuff, but it basically means it's like a STEM university. It's based in Zurich, and but you run the director of the Singapore campus, I presume.
That's right.
All right. So Dr. Kapur does that. He's a professor for learning sciences and higher education at ETH Zurich. Also directs the Future Learning Initiative. Has a book that came out recently called Productive Failure, Unlocking Deeper Learning Through the Science of Failing, and is really a pioneer, kind of created this concept of productive failure that, look, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to the show, and I think we're all going to be relieved to find out there's something actually productive about failure because we do so much of it. So Dr. Kapur, really, really excited to have you on the show and excited to dig into this concept. Welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're in Singapore right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay, cool. So it's 5 p.m. where I am in Utah. That makes it, and I cheated because you told me this earlier. That makes it just after 8 a.m. where you are. Yes, sir?
Exactly. It's the morning here. Yeah. Okay,
cool. Before we get into productive failure and, some of the other work that you've done, we really like to take at least a few moments here on this show to get to know the man behind the achievements and all such things. Right. And especially really kind of looking for, how does the person that ends up coming on this show become the person that ends up coming on this show, right? So, So take us back, perhaps even to, little boy Manu, right. just a boy, a wide-eyed boy with some dreams. How'd you end up here? What was the road that led to doing this kind of work, if you would?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, little boy Manu was born in India, in the northern plains of India. And growing up, I wanted to be a football player, a soccer player. I went for the
right. Thank you.
Right? And and I trained very hard. When I was playing competitive football for a number of years until I broke my knee, and that career was ended. So that was my real dream, is to become a professional football player, a professional soccer player, right? And when that happened, I was pretty devastated. I was close to 20. Then I finished up my engineering school, dabbled in a couple of startups, which basically didn't work out. It was the dot-com boom of the late 90s, if you remember. Mm-hmm. And then I got a job to teach math to students or kids from poor income neighborhoods. And so I taught for a few years, and that
This is still in northern India?
No, by this time I was already in Singapore. I did my bachelor's in engineering in Singapore, and then I stayed on to teach after doing the entrepreneurship stuff. And that I really liked. I liked really, how do people come to, especially for math, right? How do people come to understand something such as abstract as mathematics? How does that process look like, and so on and so forth. And then I really got lucky to get a scholarship to do my PhD at Columbia University in New York. So I went to New York, spent 3 years there, finished up, and came came back as a professor at one of the Singapore universities.
What did you do your doctoral studies in?
In the learning sciences, basically.
Learning
the
sciences.
science of how human beings learn. And there I picked up this idea of failure, learning from failure, because I was trying to understand, how is it that if you don't know something and I tell you exactly what that thing is, say you don't know math concept, I explain it to you, still your understanding remains shallow. So really the problem that I tried to work on in my doctoral thesis was, how is it that we learn very poorly, not just from bad instruction, but even from very good instruction?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the real paradox. And I finished up, and the rest of my career has been focused on just unpacking that problem, trying to understand it, and then design interventions or learning models that help us learn from failure.
So you help, in a nutshell, on your tombstone, let's say, Dr. Kapur helps humans learn better.
That's right. Through failure.
Fair enough. Through failure. Okay. So then connect us. You said you got exposed to this idea of learning through failure during that time. When and how did it start to emerge as kind of like a concept that could, anchor a career, if you will?
Yeah. So I think it was really, dots connect when you look back.
Right.
So it really came to a point where, there were conversations around learning from failure, that failure can be good for learning, but no one was really talking about, okay, if failure can be a powerful teacher, then why do we wait for it to happen? Why don't we intentionally design for it in a safe way so that people can experience it in a safe way, in a structured way, and that sets them up for deep learning later on. So I think it was that moment, that epiphany that happened sometime in my second year of doctoral studies that just took the conversation that one notch up, and say, let's deliberately design for it. And then what would that look like? And then as a scientist, you have to not just ask the question, you have to operationalize it and say, I need to design an experiment to show a proof of concept of this idea. And that set of experiment became my doctoral thesis. And that's how productive failure was born. In fact, I didn't call it productive failure early. My thesis is not called productive failure.
Well, I was going to say, you probably didn't know yet. You had to validate it before you could attach productive.
Exactly.
Well, it sounds like it's been highly productive. As I'm looking at some of the notes here, it says that a meta-analysis, and I'm interested to know what that meta-analysis consisted of, but it indicates that students exposed to these methods, meaning methods that you present in your book and you've developed through your work, perform 2 academic years ahead of their peers, and that the same benefits apply for professionals and leaders.
That's right.
Talk to me about that, please.
Yeah. So first, what a meta-analysis, that's the gold standard pretty much of any research finding. So, oftentimes they say, oh, this study showed X.
Right.
Okay, it's a great study, showed X. That's not a stable, reliable finding. So in science, when somebody shows a study, other scientists don't say, oh, yeah, okay, from now on, we believe X. That's not what happens. Other scientists would say, oh, I want to replicate that without you, using your method.
Right.
I want to test whether, so if that replication effort, and the logic of replication is, I want to fail your hypothesis. I want to prove you wrong.
Right.
Really, right? And so if they replicate and they're not able to prove me wrong, then that adds on to the evidence. And say another lab comes out, they also want to prove me wrong, and they are also not able to. They keep finding the same effects. So what a meta-analysis does is it aggregates all of these studies around the world that are in this genre of productive failure learning experiments, and says, what are we learning from this aggregate set? Not from one study, but from more than 50 studies. We're 100 over experiments within those studies. What are we learning on average from that, right? And there we found that, the average effect of productive failure is twice what you would learn from a good teacher in 1 year.
And I think it's important also to note that a you know, meta-analysis, or once studies reach the level of, you know, meta-ness, if you will, that you know, it's beyond just validating the conclusion, but it's also quantifying the conclusion, right? Because you might have one study that shows that, oh, people learn better, but how much better probably needs more data points, more studies.
That's right.
Wait, oh, go ahead.
No, the individual studies can also say, oh, they learned so much better. The point of a meta-analysis, can you have an aggregate sense? Because some says one, 50% better, another says 100% better, another says 30% better in different contexts around. So what is the aggregate? On average, what's the quantified effect? I think that's what we want to look at.
So I'm actually interested. I hear about, you know, meta-analysis. I do a lot of work on the psychology side of things, and, you know, we're always trying to figure out what makes humans tick, and you need a certain amount of data to feel confident about it, especially if you're going to recommend, you know, behavioral modalities for people. Like, if somebody's going to invest time and energy in doing something differently, you want to have pretty high degree of confidence that it's going to be good for them.
Right.
So, but I'm curious, I'm not a scientist. At what point do you have enough studies that sort of generally scientifically you can say, okay, there are enough studies that we can study the studies and draw a meta conclusion? You know, I know in statistics there's three data points can constitute an emerging trend, but I get the sense it takes more than 3 studies before you're drawing these meta conclusions.
Oh yeah, I mean, there are no strict answers here, but at least in my research, I look for at least 30.
30.
You know,
okay.
Yeah, at least 30 different studies have to be reported. Oftentimes, even in meta-analysis, you get meta-analysis, reported that have fewer than that. But I start to feel comfortable when, you know, there are more than 30 studies. And it also depends on where these 30 studies are. You know, if it's a robust replication from different contexts with different people, you know, that kind of adds to the robustness of the findings. If much of the work is coming from just one country in one context, then that's okay. It's still a very good effect. At least it's working somewhere and working somewhere robustly and reliably. But I think the more spread out, heterogeneous it is, the better.
The reason I like this line of thinking for ourselves, for the individuals, myself and those listening, is not because we're all scientists that are going to go out and try to, you know, prove theories, but because I think a huge part of optimized living and doing and being comes from understanding and learning how to work our way out from underneath our biases.
That's right.
And so anything that says, okay, we're eliminating variables so that we can be really confident that what we're saying means what we think what we're saying it means, I think that applies to a lot more than just scientists.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because I do think there's a lot of wisdom that we use, that we apply in our own lives, that we really haven't validated that wisdom. You know, just because our grandma said it, have we done a meta study of all grandmas to see if they all said it or just ours said it? You know, right?
That's right.
Okay, so then talk to me. I mean, this is powerful to say that, you know, and really help me understand the quantification here. Students exposed to these methods perform 2 academic years ahead of their peers. I mean, basically are you saying that by intentionally structuring the learning process to include, you know, by designing it for failure in some particular way, which I assume you'll give us, you know, a description of, that we can shorten the learning curve around sophisticated or complex subjects by as much potentially as 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, not so much shorten, it's just how deep the understanding is. So if you compare, two sets of students, one going through the traditional method and the other one learning the same thing with the same teacher in the same time, using productive failure methods, then at the end of it, you can ask the question, what have they learned? How deeply have they understood what they've learned? And can they use these things to transfer to novel situations, more advanced, to apply it in more novel contexts, which is ultimately the goal of learning, is to take what you know and try to creatively solve novel problems, right? So, and then we ask that question, and there we can measure, okay, how much better do productive failure students do compared to direct instruction students? And that's where I've tried to understand, if we quantify that effect, what is that? And then we benchmark that effect against, what can a student learn from a good teacher in a school year? So there are educational benchmarks for quantifying, 1 unit of learning from a good teacher in a year.
Right.
Compare that, so because there's lots of studies there, and we can compare that 1 unit with the effect of productive failure, and we see, oh, okay, so productive failure has, on average, twice, but if you do it really well, it can have 3 times the effect.
Does this apply equally or more or less, or I guess I would say, how does this apply differently across different sort of, like if you have like the STEM set over here where it's a lot of, essentially the genre is about stacking formulas in more and more sophisticated ways, in a sense, versus something like maybe, I'll use 2 different examples. One being like learning how to compose music as an example, where there's still sort of a formulaic or algorithmic nature to it, but there's not so much of a right-wrong component to it, maybe, if you will. And then another example would be like actually entrepreneurship, where there is a right-wrongness in the sense of maybe a profit and loss. Is it a profitable model? But there's still a lot more nuance to it than just saying either they got the problem right or they didn't. How does it apply across those different dynamics of subject matter?
Yeah.
Makes sense?
So I'll make the distinction between the science, the evidence, and the application of it, right? So if you want to carry out an experiment, we generally tend to, as scientists, tend to use domains that are highly structured, like math and science. And we can use this, and then that helps us understand in more predictable, reliable ways how the mind works, right? And we can test the efficacy of a learning model based on these structured domains. That's why there's a lot of work on how people play chess, how people do math, how people because these are very structured. Now the idea is, once we understand the mind and we are able to design interventions based on these fundamental processes, the mind does not change. The cognitive architecture does not change if you shift from math to language to art to music. So we've got an entry point into understanding the fundamental mechanisms and designing learning models through a structured domains like science and math. But when you shift the domain itself, whether you're going into arts, language, history, or entrepreneurship, the cognitive architecture remains the same, right? We've got, and therefore the models can be applied in these other domains as well. So that's how it works, basically.
Yeah, that's super cool, because I'm thinking with the audience in mind, right? I don't have exact data, but I would probably throw out that over 50% of the audience listening are involved in some sort of entrepreneurship. I think there's a good chunk that are involved in some sort of creative arts. I'm a former jazz musician, so I tend to attract and resonate with that group. And then invariably, I'm sure we have some scientists and some engineers. And so I think it's super cool to know that what you're describing, it makes a lot of sense. It's easier to play with it and understand it in more structured domains, but it's going to apply to everything because the mind is the mind.
The mind, exactly that.
Okay, so then in that, with that in mind, talk to me. How do we? In the notes it says that intentionally designing for failure to promote deep learning. How do we start to intentionally design things for failure?
Yeah. So great. So just imagine a situation where, say you're about to learn something new. And let's say learn something new, a new concept in math or science or art or history or whatever it is. And the typical way that somebody might learn this, it would be an expert or a teacher would come in and say, here is the concept, here's examples of it, here's how you apply it or formulate it and then apply it to solve certain problems. So you learn it first, and then you apply using, problem solving. In productive failure, we kind of start not with the learning first. We say, okay, we design activities, problem solving activities where you would feel engaged, where you feel intuitively you're able to generate ideas and solutions, but they're designed in a way that your ideas are not going to get you to the correct solution. In fact, you're even told that, hey, you don't know the concepts required to solve these problems, but the goal here is not a correct solution. The goal is how would you intuitively, using all the knowledge that you have, to try to approach it in different ways and not worry about getting it right or wrong. So typically we engage people in that kind of an explorative but very structured problem-solving activities that are designed for them not to get to the correct solution. And what that does is it shows the learner, what is it that they know? But it also creates the boundary conditions. Says, okay, I tried several things. They did not work out. That means there's a gap between what I know and what I need to know. Right? And if at that point then the teacher comes in and says, or an expert comes in and says, okay, let's look at what you've done. Here's how you actually solve it. Compare and contrast. And it's in those moments, it's in those processes that people start to see, okay, I was thinking of it this way. Actually, if you think of it this other way, it actually works. And that leads to deep understanding. Right?
Interesting, because it gives you a basis for comparison.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like you learn something, but even when you learn something, you're still bringing biases, instincts, presuppositions, maybe sort of assumed knowledge that you don't even realize you're bringing to the question. And so even if you're just applying something you learned, it's not purely what you've learned. It's what you've learned mixed with a bunch of stuff that isn't what you learned that you already brought to the table. But then you go out and you try to apply what you've learned and you get some result, and you have no way to delineate, well, how much of this result was produced by what I learned versus how much of it was produced by what I already brought with me, relearning. And there's nothing, because you have nothing to compare it to. You have no way to Occam's razor out the stuff that didn't work.
Exactly. Let me give an even simpler example. Suppose an alien lands on Earth and the alien wants to learn what is a cat. Now you give alien, show a picture of a cat or a live cat and say, this is a cat. What do you think the alien would learn from that? But now imagine, right? I mean, it's an example.
I just had a light bulb. Like, oh, they might think a dog is a cat because it still has 4 legs and hair and...
Yeah. But then when you say, this is a cat, these are different kinds of cats, but here are dogs, here are pigs, here are horses.
Right.
Those are not cats. This is a cat. You see? And I think that's what failure does. And that's comparison. Comparison is such a powerful mechanism for us to see things, right? And if you see the features, because you want people to see what is critical, not the 4 legs, not the tail, because many people have, but they're assembled in a particular way that makes it a cat.
Right? Yeah.
Dealing with the function of comparison, and failure produces comparison. Failure sets the stage for comparison.
That was the big thing that popped into my head as you were explaining this immediately. It was like, yeah, if I get a chance to do it myself pre-learning without the right information having been supplied, then once I get the right information, I'm going to be able to compare it to the experience of doing it without that right information. And the rightness of the information is going to be a lot more clear to me.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So, it's one thing to say we can design experiments to sort of validate this, and as part of, an academic pathway, we can create an accelerated academic pathway for students based on structuring it with this in mind, right? Versus, hey, I'm Jeff, I'm sitting at home and I decide that I want to learn how to play the piano, or I want to start an online business, or, and well, actually, let's go with starting an online business, because that's something that a lot of the audience is doing or has done. And there's very specific skills that produce a successful result in that, the skill of understanding, let's say, direct response copywriting, or understanding how to design an online sales funnel to optimize for user behavior, user interface, user experience design, like these kinds of things. I mean, they ultimately determine whether or not your business will succeed in trying to sell your wares. How could I out of the gate say, okay, I'm going to productively fail a few times so I can learn a few things not to do, so that then when I do go seek out a coach or a mentor, I'll have a better time applying what I'm learning?
Yeah, great question. It all depends on what's the risk and the cost function here. The whole idea of learning from failure is, you want to do it in a safe way where the stakes are low. And so that you learn something in a deeper way, so that when you actually have to apply it, the chances of success are higher. So that's the idea, right? So in this case, when you're trying to learn something like set up an online business, I would say, try to set up your own protocol, try to plan by yourself, see the multiple ideas that you can generate before you converge, before you go to an expert. And then even when you consult resources for how you do different aspects of the business, try to look at different ways in which this has been done, right? And so you generate your ideas, look at different ways that it can be implemented or others have implemented, compare and contrast, revise your plans, right? And then go to some kind of an expert to, try to learn deeply or to get advice, basically. Instead of going straight to the expert or to the canonical source.
Okay, I want to give you credit. You just brilliantly solved for the implied or the embedded challenge that I gave you, because you immediately identified sort of the condition within the specific context of entrepreneurship, which is that going out and intentionally failing could mean costing yourself money. It's different from failing at learning to speak Spanish or failing at learning to play the piano. There's no material loss, but like failing at entrepreneurship is expensive, right? So I love that you solved it right away, which is like, well, don't go, create a sales funnel and write a bunch of ads and then go spend $10,000 on Facebook ads to validate that it didn't work. Don't do that. Simply, and maybe you know this, but like one of the major concepts in learning online business is like, it's essentially a mimicry concept. They call it funnel hacking. Like you said, go look at what other people have done or other people are doing with similar types of offers. And usually that's prescribed as a starting point for people that are learning to create online business. And what you're saying, and I've never heard anybody say this in this context, is no. Don't go hack somebody else's funnel out of the gate. Try creating your own funnel and your own offer and your own ad copy and your own creative and your own designs and your own, everything involved without any other references. And then go do the funnel hacking piece where you can actually compare what they did against what you did before you saw what they did.
Exactly.
And it'll probably be more obvious what you did right and what you did wrong.
Exactly. And you'll understand those reasons why. Because your own assumptions, your own biases or suppositions, as you said, will emerge. Oh, I was assuming this. And most of the time things fail not for a lack of effort, but simply you've made wrong assumptions, or you have the wrong data points, or you have the wrong skill, or suboptimal. I think those are things that failure can bring out if you're disciplined about that process.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you have any guidance or sort of parameters for people that are, as we said, intentionally designing for failure? Like any things to keep in mind as you attempt to do that?
Yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. And I think we need to learn how to be uncomfortable or get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And this is what I call entering the failure zone, basically. I mean, I think, if you try something and you're able to do it successfully, that's great, right?
Right.
But then you're not learning. You're just applying what you know. To learn something new, you need to try something even more difficult, something that you don't know, right? And so if you try and you're not able to do it successfully, that's the good point. That's the signal that you're now entering the failure zone. That things here, you're going to struggle a little bit. You'll have a bit of frustration. Things may not work out. But this is the zone in which you need to explore. This is where you create your own funnel hacking systems, your own your own solutions first, as difficult as it may be. And then find resources within the zone, like looking at other people's ideas and solutions, seeking experts. After you've done this, to then design your learning. So my first message to all is enter the failure zone, expect things would be frustrating and you would struggle a little bit and things will not work out, but this is precisely the zone in which you'll learn deeply and grow.
So one of my theories, if you will, essentially this show and my whole life is really around developing a general theory of almost like determinable success. It's like, how can we create a generalized method that people can use to steer their life successfully in the direction of what they want?
Right.
Which, unfortunately, I don't think our traditional education system is very good at that for most people. It's very good at steering people in a direction of what society or the economy wants or needs from them and of them, but not necessarily for them.
Right.
And so as I'm trying to solve this, like, let's maximize the probability that I'm going to be able to take my life in the direction that I want it to go. So all of my sort of like sub-theories are either based on how to successfully or more successfully do that, or how to better understand what's in the way of someone doing that. And one of the what's in the way theories is basically that the older we get, the less willing most people get to be seen as a failure, or to be seen in their failing. When we're 5 years old, we're not terribly ashamed if we get a question wrong in class.
Right.
But when we're 50 years old, most of us have built our identities and frankly our entire lives around the things that we feel we can confidently and predictably do right. And we've tried to minimize the areas where we do things wrong. And we've got a lot of ego wrapped up in that, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if, how much you bump into, and now science is different, right? In science, a failure is still a success because you've still learned and you've eliminated an option, right? And Thomas Edison said, I didn't fail, 10,000 times inventing the light bulb. I just figured out 10,000 ways that didn't work, right? And that's kind of the scientist approach. But most adults are almost embarrassed to fail. So how do you help people deal with the emotional resistance that might impede what you're describing, particularly, adults?
Great question.
Real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. So I use text messages to provide unique value to my podcast listeners. These texts can just be random thoughts. It can be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning or some free training that I'm planning to host for the community. Just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that number is 702-996-3926. Now let's get back to the podcast.
One way I try is to make the distinction between learning and performance. I think people confuse the two, they conflate the two, but learning is not the same as performance, right? And this is why this our fear of failure comes in, because we always think that we need to be in a performance zone. That means I know something, I want to apply, and I want to deliver high performance, right? And yes, by as we grow older, we develop more. We have more knowledge, more capabilities, and we enter more and more into exploiting that. So we in the performance aspects. So much so that we forget that there is this other zone, which is the learning zone, right? And learning zone is where things are difficult, where you don't have the capabilities or capacities or the experience or expertise to be able to perform well. But you're not going to be able to get to expertise unless you go through that learning zone, right? Which is entering the failure zone, struggling, generating ideas, struggling, and then getting resources to learn from. And so first thing that we all need to do as adults or any time in life is know very clearly for ourselves, am I in the performance zone? Then, yeah, no doubt. Let's perform at the highest level. Success is the norm. Let's get to the best possible, right? More efficiently.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want your surgeon operating on you to get confused, right?
Right.
Or your pilot flying the plane. You don't. They are in the performance zone. They need to do
or your sales funnel when you're running live ads and spending real money. That's your performance zone.
That's a performance zone. But then there is a learning zone that often precedes a performance zone or can be in parallel with it. And so when you're in the learning zone, and if the mindset, if people understand in the learning zone, yes, it will be frustration is the norm, failure is the norm, struggle is the norm, and that's the path to learning something deeply that you can then perform. Then it gives them a sort of an analytical toolkit to, okay, categorize. Okay, I'm in the learning zone. This is the norm, and therefore I can deal with it now if I'm having those emotional, frustrations and so on and so on. So it's just a simple, asking yourself, which zone am I in right now? And that can trigger different kinds of ways of dealing with what the norm is in these zones. And that helps people, basically.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that it's probably a really sort of apropos meta question, if you will, across a life. How much of my life is, or even how much of my time, like the time aspect of my life is performance zone versus learning zone, and to actually start to optimize for more time in the learning zone and less time in the performance zone. And if we let's say we get paid for our ability to perform, how do I maximize the return on performance time with the intent to deliberately minimize that time without minimizing the return, without reducing the rewards I get? In other words, create more leverage for every second I spend in the performance zone so that I can maximize the return, thus allowing me to get the same by doing less. Because over time, the long-term compounding investment is going to be to increase the amount of time I can spend in the learning zone.
Exactly that. So it's the present return versus future returns. And you optimize the future returns or lifelong returns through the learning zone, because that amplifies your capability to perform. But if you get stuck in the performance zone, you get obsolete very quickly.
Okay, so to the entrepreneurs in the audience, and I would extend entrepreneur to mean really to the, I was going to say to the 1099s, whether it's the massage therapist or the electrical services contractor or the musician or the dancer, but I would actually say even to the W-2 earner, which that's in America, that's they probably have a different form in Singapore, but that means the people that get paid, for a job, a salary. But like in all of these regards, really, that's really cool. Our present return is tied to our performance zone. Our future return and upside is tied to our learning zone. So like, how do I increase the leverage of being in the performance zone? And we talk a lot about leverage in my world because people are trying to maximize their rewards for the work that they do. But it's not just increasing leverage so that I can maintain the same inputs to increase the outputs or the rewards. It's also just so that I can maintain the outputs or the rewards while reducing the inputs, because that's going to free up more resources to invest in learning.
Exactly. It's the classic exploitation trade-off, really, right?
Oh, okay. I've heard that, but I'm not real facile with that concept. Exploitation trade-off. Can you expound on that?
I give you suppose there's a big sort of garden and there's treasure hidden in different parts of the garden. And I say, go, Jeff, go look for the treasure. And you look a little bit, and then, your seeking skills become better, and then you find something, right? And then you dig some more, and there's more, and then you get stuck in that, right? And you spend all your time just delivering on that. Okay, let me take out this treasure. I'm here, I can do this, and I can do this well, and I'm now digging even faster and better, and so on. I'm processing it. I focus on that. That is exploitation, because you've got certain capability, skill set, and you're in the zone. And suppose you now split some of that time. So, okay, now I've already got a place here. Let me spend some time, like I can exploit this part, but let me spend some time looking somewhere else. Maybe there is an even bigger treasure, or maybe there isn't. That's the risk of exploration, right?
Yeah.
Some time learning different, and maybe there are other different types of treasures out there that you have not. So if you completely focus on the exploitation, you miss out this other growth aspects, right? So that's the trade-off, right? And also in your own learning and growth. yes, I can fully go double down on my performance zone, but maybe I'm missing out on deep learning and growth in other areas as well. Returns.
So now I'm really gonna veer off course here and see if you want to come with me on this. As you're talking, I'm thinking, man, how would I apply this to my marriage? So in my marriage, it's the same thing. We have things that we know work in a marriage. You know, maybe they're rituals, maybe they're activities, maybe they're TV shows we already know we both like. There's things we know work, and we tend to exploit those.
Exactly.
Because it feels good to do things that have pre-established harmony in a coupleship, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to taking the risk of saying, you know, I think of my marriage, like, let's try playing tennis together. We don't know if we play tennis well together. We don't know if a one-to-one competition framework is something that we're really agile at. We might get a lot of value from, or who knows, maybe we'll end up in the biggest fight of our marriage. But it's an opportunity to explore versus exploit.
Exactly.
And and the opportunity is to enrich the marriage. The risk is to harm the marriage in some hopefully minor sense. But like, how many marriages stagnate because they only exploit and they no longer explore?
Yeah. Look, I'm not a marriage counselor, so I can just, speak at it from just the conceptual basis. Yeah, I think the concept of the one thing that we have not talked about, and I've mentioned sometimes, like the safe space. It depends how safe the space of exploration is, and I think that's the key. If the exploration space is not psychologically safe, for example, then the risk is very high. But if you feel that, because of your, the relationship or whatever that space is the marriage space or entrepreneurship space or, school space, wherever or workplace, if it's safe, then exploration, you can invest time in exploration and be assured that, okay, even if if it's frustrating, we get on each other's nerves, because fundamentally the space is safe, we will come out of it for the better, basically. Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's a really interesting, piece of this to drill into, which is about, in the context of designing for failure, it's like constructing that design for safety within the failing, and I can already tell you that I'm going to be totally going down a tangent in my own mind of like, okay, what does it look like to actually design for failure to promote deep learning in a marriage?
Yeah.
But I won't ask you to be the expert on that, because as you said, that's not your domain. But I do think it's a fascinating thing to think about. Right.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit more then about, like, what are the different facets of safety, and maybe just talk more about designing, maintaining safety in the design for failure.
Well, it's a lot of expectation management to start with, right? So you're very explicit about, okay, if I'm in the learning zone or in this exploration zone, there's going to be struggle. So, just psychologically, if people expect or have even mentally thought that, oh, this is the norm in this space, and when that helps them deal with that particular experience better, because they've already know that that's the norm. Yeah. So it'll go into a challenging situation. Yeah, this is going to be challenging. I'm going to struggle. This is the norm. Everybody around me is going to feel the same thing. I'm going to get frustrated, but that is the norm. So when you actually experience that, you're in a better place to deal with it. Okay, so just setting the expectations in terms of what you're going to be feeling and be upfront about it. So if you go out with your wife to play tennis, I said, I'm going to get frustrated because you're not hitting the ball well, and I'm just, and you're going to be frustrated with me, or maybe we won't be able to string any rallies, and we're going to both get frustrated. But let's know that, going in, this is going to be the norm.
Right.
So I think, again, that, and when that thing would happen, which it would happen, you've already thought about it. It will still be frustrating, but this is not, that we expected this to happen. So that's expectation management. You also want to give yourself some runway, some time, and be patient with yourself, because, being in the learning zone, it takes time to develop certain skill sets and abilities and not rush into it. So having a time component is also very important. Not focusing too much on getting the right answer or getting to the right solution initially should also be an expectation, because, we tend to think that, making learning easy eases learning. Actually, that's not true. Right? Sometimes you have to make things a little bit harder when you're in this failure zone, in the exploration zone, and that's what leads to learning. And in the end, I think it's also about vulnerability. People don't expect it, but when you're in this zone, you will, because you would not be able to get things right, you will feel vulnerable. And to know that you can openly express that vulnerability in that zone, and that even that may even be helpful to the other persons who are with you in that zone. These kinds of actions actually help, not just exploring in marriage, but also in workplace, if you're trying new things, digging on new projects, or if you're in schools, in science. This vulnerability, being open about your own vulnerability and expecting it to be the case, actually makes a huge difference. So there's different elements that you could do, like I said, to create this psychologically safe space.
So I actually, this felt like a thing to actually take notes on, because I'm thinking in my operational leadership of our business, I mean, I want, like, this is highly germane to organizational management, right? Like, you want to design a safe space in which people can safely and productively fail.
Yeah.
And so that they can learn to maximize long-term returns, because long-term returns come from learning, not from performance, as we stated. And so I was like, I'm going to take notes on this. So managing expectations makes huge sense. Allowing for sufficient time, which is a very very important dynamic in the context of business, because every challenge in business has its own time dynamic.
Exactly.
And then the fourth one was vulnerability, and I was taking notes and I missed, what was the third one? It was expectations, it was time, something, and vulnerability.
Not necessarily converging too fast. So knowing that you have exploration, by definition, means that you don't look for convergence, you look for divergence, you look for, so jumping from one idea to the next, holding even contradictory ideas in your head at the same time and exploring. That's what exploration is. But our mind basically, psychologically, we want to converge. We want certainty. We want,
Yeah. This has really emerged as a meta theme of this podcast.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier today, I did an interview that'll be they'll be published, weeks apart. But I had a conversation with the founder of the Non-Obvious company, talking about non-obvious thinking. I've had a gentleman on who talks about AI, and he uses Ken Stanley is his name, and he intentionally programs AI to be non-object oriented. So it's not like all the AI conversations about using AI to solve for things. And he's like, what if we set AI only about to discover things and not to solve for anything? It's kind of like what you're saying. In other words, tolerate both across time and the breadth of space, like allow for as much divergence as may emerge, and don't be trying to force things to converge. And what can you learn? And he's done a lot of really cool stuff from AI. So you have non-obvious, you have non-object orientation. I've had a guy on the show. Multiple people have gotten into the limitations of hyperlinear thinking, and now we're talking about allowing for more divergence in design, and even the concept of designing for failure, sort of like cuts against the grain. These are really, really profound success principles, I think. And I think that more and more, earlier when I was talking to the non-obvious guy, Rohit Bhargava is his name, I said it almost feels like we're not just talking about things that maybe enrich our life experience in a world where anything that's, predictable or linear or sequential is probably going to be thus programmable and automatable.
Yep, exactly.
The only remaining human value is going to be our ability to do this wonky stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very well said. Anything that's codifiable, actually, what we say in AI, anything that's codifiable would be automated. It's the things that are not codifiable, and some deep learning, tacit knowledge, things that make us humans that we can't even talk about it in any formal way.
I'll say it.
Yeah. So my hope with again veering off into the AI conversation, is my hope with the AI advances is that it'll force us to be more human.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting to think about, and I guess in a sense, this is what machine learning is it's structured learning from iterative failures.
Exactly.
But not in the same way that humans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's not the same models. Yeah.
Okay, so in the notes that I had to prep for the episode, it talked about some sort of methodological components of designing, for intentional failure to promote deep learning. It talked about specific retrieval practices to reinforce learning through repeated attempts. And I feel like what that's saying is make sure that through every iteration of this process that you have a mechanism in place to capture the learnings as you go.
Yes, and allowing yourself to forget or fail in the retrievals. Let me give you an example. When you go to a party or a networking session, you go up to somebody and say, "Hi, I am Jeff," and I will say, "Hi, I'm Manu." What retrieval practice would suggest is doing something really different. Right? We do introductions really wrong. So what I will come up to you and say, "Hey, are you Mark?" I will make a guess your name. I will guess your name. All right. "Hey, are you Mark?" He said, No, I'm Jeff." And then I was, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm Manu," I'll say, you might go and say, "Oh, are you Tony?" And I said, No, I'm Manu. Now, what we've done there is we've taken the power retrieval practice. Now, this is in the extreme sense, right? I just wanted to make it funny as well. But this is in the extreme case. I made a wild guess about who you are, and chances are that wild guess would be a failure.
Right.
Then you tell me what you really are. And this combination of the wild failed guess together with the correct guess, correct knowledge, actually leads to better memory than just having the correct one, right? So retrieval practice is one mechanism of why failure works. It's like it's advantages for you, because then you've created. So a year from now, if I have to remember you, I say, "Oh, yes, I called him Mark, and actually he was Jeff," as opposed to, "Who's that person? What was his name?" It's harder because now I've created a retrieval practice mechanism to aid.
Wow, and you've really dimensionalized the name where there's another name which is not Mark.
Yeah, exactly. And not Mark is a way to get to Jeff.
Yeah. Like, honestly, I didn't know what we were going to get in the last minute here by asking that question. This is gold. I am so excited.
Yes.
To go to a party, and an audience, I'm inviting you into this. Meet people by guessing their names, getting it wrong, creating a memory, making yourself far more impressionable and memorable, telling the story of, "Oh yeah, I was listening to this podcast," or in my case, I got to host this podcast and I was listening to a learning expert, and we stumbled on, or not stumbled on, I stumbled in at your invitation to this methodology for better retention of names, that I will be more likely to remember your name by having failed at guessing it first. Exactly. And I know you'll be more likely to remember mine because I did. This is incredible.
Yeah.
You just upped my networking games so profoundly.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this in the book too. So this is one of the examples, the toy example that I give in the book is exactly about this, so the people can relate to that. And it's fun as well, right?
That is so cool. I love it. My inner nerd is like celebrating because I love little life hacks like this. Thank you. Tell the world how they can go get more of your goodness. And I know you have this book, Productive Failure. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience or invite them into?
Yes, please go have a look at my website, all my talks. I have a couple of TED Talks as well. So if you want a snapshot of the work and the thinking, type my name and TED Talks, and those will turn up, or go to my website, manukapur.com, or get the book, which is out.
Dr. Kapur, thank you. This has been a
Thank you
blast.
so much, Jack. This was a lot of fun. I hope it was the same for your audience as well.
Yeah, no, it sure was. Again, thank you for being a guest. And of course, to all the viewers and listeners out there, you know what I'm about to say, that even when Dr. Kapur is on the show, you guys out there are the best part of this show. You're why we do it every time. And I can't wait to see you next time. Thanks for the time. Take care.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely gonna love this one. Check it out.
Who influences you the most? The person that influences you the most is you. During our days, if we're not careful, we have something negative, we'll allow that to suppress the positive. But ultimately, nothing will hurt you more than your thoughts. Nothing will heal you more than your thoughts. And nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. The smart person believes half of what they hear. The intelligent person knows which half to believe. Don't assume that you should be believing everything you believe.